Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about here is going to be outliers. And an outlier is just a number in a set of data that's much larger, much smaller than other items in the set. Having outliers in your data can cause it to skew some of it. So we're going to look and see what it does, what having an outlier will do. So I've got a set of data here, and we have an outlier. Okay, I've got 3, 3, 6, 6, 6, 7, 8, 9, 35. Wow, that's a lot bigger. That makes that an outlier. So my outlier is 35. What effect does the outlier have on the range? Well, without the outlier, our range was simply 6. But with the outlier, its range is now 32. So your outliers will greatly affect your range. Moving on, if I look at your mode, with or without, your mode is still going to be 6. Okay, so mode isn't affected very much by the outlier. And then our median, with or without, is also 6. Okay, so one thing that we can find so far is we could say that our range is going to be greatly affected if I leave an outlier in my data set. However, your mode and median will not be affected that much if you would leave an outlier in your data set. Okay, so that's essentially what we're looking at here. Should we take outliers out of our data set, or should we leave them in? So median mode, not going to affect it very much. Range, it's going to affect it a ton. And then probably the two most common types that you see when you're looking at data is going to be mean and your standard deviation. So let's see how much it affects it in our mean. So when I'm finding the mean with the outlier, that leaves me with a 9.2. When I find the mean without the outlier, I get 6. So right off the bat, when you look at that, you see 9.2, you see 6. They're not that far off. So did it really affect it that much? Well, if I look at my numbers there without my outlier, what's the largest number that I have? 9. So when we find our average, it puts it at 6, which is pretty close to the middle. But if I look at it with the outlier, my mean is 9.2. So is that an accurate representation of my mean, having that be 9.2? No, because all but one of your numbers is smaller than your average. And that doesn't really make sense. We want our average to be somewhere in the middle. So we can say that your mean would be greatly affected by an outlier, which would make me think that you would not want to include an outlier in your data sets if you're trying to find the mean. If we look at standard deviation, I've got all this filled out for you, so don't freak out. Okay, our standard deviation with the outlier is 9.3, meaning on average, all these numbers are about 9.3 apart. I don't know that I agree with that. Well, let's look at it without the outlier. Our standard deviation is 2. That seems a little bit more accurate than 9.3. So again, our standard deviation is greatly affected by our outlier. So if you're trying to find standard deviation for something, I would probably avoid looking at outliers. The last thing that we have to cover with this lesson is our box and whisker plots. You guys have done these before, but let's just review them real quick. Okay, first off, we've got 5 things that we need to have graphed when we do this. Your minimum value, your median, and your maximum value. All 3 very easy to find. You've got your first quartile and your third quartile. Okay, now those may seem a little bit new. Our first quartile, however, is just the median, which we know how to find the median. It's the median of the lower half of the data set. And our third quartile is just the median, which we know how to find, of the upper half of the data. Other names that you'll hear for first quartile or third quartile, some people call the first quartile the lower quartile and the third quartile the upper quartile. Now, notice there's a box around. Why is there a box around? Well, if we look at this here, these quartiles, we're looking at the median, which remember, median is the middle set. That means if my median is right here, That means 50% of my data is on this side and 50% of my data is on this side. So if I add then medians, because my quartiles are the middle of the lower half and the middle of the upper half, that means that I've now divided this into fourths. So 25% is here, 25% is here, 25% is here, and 25% is here. Okay? So the whole point of a box and whisker plot is it kind of shows how the data is dispersed. And the reason that there's a box between your first quartile and your third quartile is because that in this data here is the middle 50%. So the middle 50% is between your first quartile and your third quartile. Okay? So that kind of gives you a decent estimate of where your average is. So let's go ahead and work through and let's find out how we solve one of these. Okay, I've got the numbers listed as 32, 44, 42, 34, 40, 34, 33, 30, 46. One thing with these, if we're trying to find median, that means that we need to put our numbers in order. So when I do that, I now have 30, 32, 33, 34, 34, 40, 42, 44, 46. Now, I'm just trying to find our medians throughout this. So cross out, cross out, cross out, cross out. Cross out, cross out, cross out, cross out. Our middle number is 34. So that's our first median. Okay? Now, finding the lower quartile or the first quartile, I'm going to ignore what my median value was. So I'm going to cross out, cross out. I've got two values here. How do you find the median with two values? Remember, we add those two up and then we divide by 2. So 32 plus 33 divided by 2 gives me a 32.5. That's my lower quartile. Then I'm going to find my upper quartile, which is just the median of the upper part of the data. So cross out, cross out. I've got 42 and 44. So again, two numbers, 42 plus 44 divided by 2 gives me 43. Okay? So I have found my median, my lower quartile, and my upper quartile. Now I need to find the minimum and maximum values. This will be tough. Minimum, maximum. Okay? So we've got all 5 data points then. So next, I'm going to draw a number line. And my number line, sorry about that. Shocking that Mr. Schieber would try to interrupt a lesson with an all call. Anyway, we have our 5 numbers there. Sorry, I got kind of distracted. I lost my train of thought. But when I go to graph this, I'm going to draw a number line. On your number line, you probably want to include all of your numbers that are present. So we went 30 to 48. Okay, I got a little bit extra on one side. I take each of these 5 points and I graph them on my line as dots. So you can see median was at 34. Okay. Lower quartile, 32.5, just slightly above my 32. Minimum was on 30. My upper quartile was on 43, so in between 42 and 44. And then my maximum value was at 46. Okay? Remember, you draw a box around your upper and lower. Okay? Include a line where your median is, so you know where the middle is. Okay? And then we just draw the whiskers. This is our whiskers here, out to our minimum and our maximum. Okay? Again, this means that 50% of this data is within this box here. So one thing that I can say about it is, just looking at this picture, our upper 50% is pretty spread out, and our lower 50% is pretty compact. Okay? Probably means that our average, since we've got more bigger numbers, is probably going to be shifted over more a little bit this way. But this is all stuff that you learn just to infer as you move along. And that is it for our last lesson. We have a lesson practice. Find the mean, median, mode, range, and standard deviation for this set of data here. Your mean should be 6. Your median should be 6.5. Your mode should be 7. Your range should be 2.5. Your standard deviation should be 1.04. Okay, all those are pretty much approximate. Actually, I think 1.04 may be the only approximate one. But anyway, work through that. See if you guys can get all those answers. If you don't, come in and ask questions. I'll help you with it on it. And then you also have a box and whisker plot that you need to do. You don't even need to find any data. I tell you what the median is. I tell you the lower quartile, the upper quartile, the maximum, and the minimum. Just draw your picture. Do those just to check and make sure that you guys understand what's going on with our lesson 25. Okay? There is your homework. Good luck. Have a great 4-day weekend.